For many Americans, the understanding of the distinctive religious developments in England and in Great Britain, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, England together, that area is more intriguing to us and probably more familiar to us because it so much influences our early American history. Let's go back for a second. Remember, Henry VIII had inherited a unified empire from his father, Henry VII. Henry VII had defeated all the other forces in the War of Roses by 1485. Henry takes over. He had then, of course, been married to his dead brother's wife, which was a dynastic inheritance of a policy of, remember, royals always marry royals. In this case, there is also, though, a biblical clause, if you look within the Christian understanding of what's called Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, that a man should not marry his dead brother's wife. Now, Henry didn't seem to be bothered by that, but here's the issue. For most men in the Middle Ages, especially monarchs, they want to leave behind a son. And if they don't have a son to leave behind, they are sort of seen as a failure. Henry has been married to Catherine of Aragon for quite some time. They have one surviving daughter. Her name is Mary. She is perfectly healthy, but she's not a man. So Henry increasingly is getting worried about leaving behind a daughter to replace him when he dies. And by this point in time, it appears as if his queen, Catherine of Aragon, has gone into menopause. So Henry has to either stick with his one legitimate daughter, find some reason to get rid of his first wife and be able to try and have a son with another woman. And at this point in time, Henry is starting to worry. Now, in the 1520s, as this sort of rolling out over a series of years, remember, on the mainland in Germany and other places in the 1520s, there is lots and lots of agitation about Lutheranism and the struggle to have the religious faith settled in many places, so that the idea of religious change is in the air on the continent, and it may go to England if it comes to be. But here's the idea. As Henry moves forward with his idea to try and have a son, his mistress announces that she's pregnant. Anne Boleyn is pregnant. Now, Henry has a choice. Lots of monarchs at lots of places in Europe have had illegitimate children by mistresses, and that's not new. But what is new in this scenario is that now he is seeking to have a son. He's seeking to have the son be born in wedlock, in the official sanction of being legitimate. So his advisors start to tell him that they can get a quick annulment, and they've been working for years now, but it still hasn't happened. And Henry still doesn't have his annulment, okay? And he had tried for years, but now it's gotten to the point where Anne Boleyn is pregnant. He has to act fast. His decisions now are based on essentially her due date. And no more talking, no more hoping that he can get rid of his first wife officially through the Pope. He has to do it. He has to do it himself. So he, by 1529, is going to get rid of many of the ideas of the Roman Catholic Church being in charge of the Church of England. He's going to use his ideas with working with Parliament to set himself into the position of being the head of the church in England, and then grant himself a divorce, marry secretly, before this, marry his mistress, and when the mistress gives birth to a young child, it's a daughter. Her name is Elizabeth, and here's a portrait of her. She will eventually be one of the probably most famous and powerful of all the English monarchs, and in many ways be a sort of a legend both in her own mind and in many others. But now she is going to inherit the power of Henry, and is going to have to try to use it in the best ways that she can. All right? So Henry leaves behind a daughter leaves behind a daughter Mary, right? And then by his second wife, Anne Boleyn, he has a daughter named Elizabeth. He'll later on have other marriages, and will leave his fidelity and other marriage issues to the book. He is a sort of a walking soap opera when it comes to his relationships with women. I'll let the book go that route with you. But what we have here now is Henry has inherited massive power from his father. He has altered the religious settlement in England so that now the king, the monarch, is the head of the church, not the Pope. Notice, though, that what Henry did is Henry VIII, did not shift a lot of the theology of the church. He simply altered the structure. Now, other people are going to, in the next few years, work very strongly to have Henry go away from the Roman Catholic Church and into some more ideas about Protestant belief. That will be an issue as we move forward. Now, when Henry dies, he leaves behind a son whose name is Edward, but Edward does not last long, and then he dies. And now, okay, Mary, the daughter, comes into power starting in 1553, right? She is a devout Roman Catholic. She believes that she must overturn many of the decisions and changes her father had made. In many ways, overturn the embarrassment of her own mother, sort of being set aside. And also, she has a half-sister, Elizabeth, sort of waiting in the wings, Mary has basically have her under house arrest. For 5 years, Mary is going to be the Queen of England. She will start to reverse some, but not be able to reverse all of Henry's changes. And she at one point had gotten married to Philip, who's going to be Philip II, King of Spain, ardent Roman Catholic. And Mary and he do not have a surviving child. So that when she dies in 1558, Mary leaves behind only a half-sister, Elizabeth, as the true heir. And now Elizabeth is going to come to the fore and be the monarch of England. Now remember, Henry VIII had started this whole business of getting a new wife with a son to get a son. And now we're back to women controlling the thing that he had hoped a son, a male heir, never had come to fruition, except for that short time period when one of his sickly sons had lived. But now Elizabeth is going to be the queen. She inherits a nation that has lots of different faith values. There's Roman Catholics, there's some Calvinistic ideas, there are some Lutheranistic ideas, there's other independent views of Christianity. There's no uniformity anymore. Mary had tried to start a process of uniformity, at least that was a perception many had. There had been a lot of resistance to her. She had had people executed in public. There's a lot of animosity, a lot of distrust in England regarding religion. Elizabeth had lived to see this, had seen that investigating too closely the religious beliefs of people essentially led to conflict. So in one way that she does this is Elizabeth is going to be known for not prying too much into the souls of men. She's not going to try to investigate too deeply and clearly their exact religious beliefs, believing that that would cause nothing but trouble. Remember, we had something like, let's say Cyrus the Great in Persia, right? Years and years ago in the ancient world, he had been the one who had basically wanted obedience. He'd wanted people to pay taxes. And then when it came to your religion, he was less worried about what it was, as long as it did not directly oppose him. Elizabeth may have some of that same mentality. She wants to be in charge, she wants to have dignity and control, she wants to collect taxes, but if she pries into the religions of people, will she create problems for herself? And she looks on the continent and sees that's what happens. So she is going to be more and more famously thinking in terms of moderation and toleration. She is not interested in digging too deeply and causing trouble with people's faiths, as long as they do their thing a little more on the quiet, in their private realm, and not making a big problem in public or challenging her or her church, you're allowed to continue. That's going to be the beginnings of some interesting ideas within English religion, which is the idea of some kind of limited toleration, right? That as we go into more advanced English history, you're going to see that the problem of religious diversity is going to continue to be there, but how they're going to deal with it will change over time. In the initial reaction, for example, with Luther, the idea on the continent had been to attack Protestantism militarily, religiously, and legally and try to exterminate it that way. It had failed, and then toleration was the sort of second option on the table, and that's going to be something that's going to take Europeans quite some time to work through. Guaranteeing religious liberty, whether it's at the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, or later on we'll talk about it in the Peace of Westphalia as well. But the idea I'm looking for here, great religious diversity, no uniformity of understanding and tolerance, and what's going to happen is that religion is going to be a continuing issue. There are extremes in European politics, but in England especially, there is an extreme between those who are Roman Catholic Christian, RCC, and those who are puritanical, those who have more Lutheranistic but mostly Calvinistic ideas about transforming and changing the church. And Elizabeth is sort of in between, and she has to find a way to deal with it. Now, in the midst of all this controversy, she is, of course, remaining as queen. She does not choose to marry. In part because she officially gives out that she's sort of married to England or married to the English realm. A nice sort of device to explain why she's not married, but I think she fully realizes, like many women of the time period, In essence, the deep patriarchy of society and law is so powerful that when a man and woman marry, oftentimes the woman becomes the one in the shadow. And she did not want that to happen. Also, finding a suitable bride or a groom for her would have been very difficult in the political and the religious situation of the time, and sometimes it was just best left undone. Early in her reign, when she was younger, there was much speculation about her marrying. Later on, of course, it becomes obvious that she will not. That means that somebody's going to have to take her place. Her closest relatives are up in Scotland, all right? And they look to be the next dynasty who will come down to England. But like we mentioned earlier, John Knox had taken Presbyterianism from Geneva back to Scotland. The royal family maintained a deep loyalty to Roman Catholicism. Mary, Queen of Scots, her own life is a soap opera. If you want to look her up, she's a great soap opera. But essentially what happens is that her own son is kidnapped from her and will be raised as a Calvinist Christian in the Presbyterian tradition. She runs away to England and is taken in by her cousin Elizabeth I and put under house arrest. But Mary, Queen of Scots, continues to try to agitate. She maintains her loyalty to the Roman Catholic Church. She is involved in various conspiracies and eventually is executed by her cousin Elizabeth for essentially fulminating treason. And what that sets off then is that the Spanish, who had hoped to see England come back into Roman Catholicism, are going to launch the Armada of 1588. It will fail miserably. This large-scale invasion for the purposes of religion from Spain and its allies on England fails due to a series of bad storms and English tactics at sea. By 1588, after the death of Mary, Queen of Scots, it's quite obvious now that the Spanish are not going to be able to re-Catholicize England, and the Scots are not going to be able to do it either. In that essence, then, Elizabeth will continue to live where she is going to be mixing elements of various kinds of religious faith and staying away from the intoleration that had marked many of the European approaches to religion. She will help establish, even though there's great extremism, she will help establish the idea increasingly in England that it's more about taxes and obedience and less about your religious faith. Not exclusively, but the door is going to be open. Take a look at this key period in talking about and learning more about English history, and also especially take a look at the very complex nature of the religious changes of Henry VIII through his children all the way to Elizabeth. It can be a bit complex, but it will give you a sense of change over time as it goes from being essentially a church that's Catholic, run by the king, to one that's now Protestant and run by a queen, with lots of different changes along the way. Also see if there's some of the sample questions that can help clarify some issues here.